And then before the word was even printed in the public media, I did a PhD in ecology in the late 60s. And while I was doing that, I heard about a group that was beginning to meet in a church basement in Vancouver called the Don't Make a Wave Committee. Greenpeace began in Vancouver, Canada, against U.S. hydrogen bomb testing in Alaska. We sailed a boat across the Pacific, bringing media attention to the subject, and President Nixon canceled the remaining nuclear tests as a result. This was the cusp of the Cold War when it began to go down and missiles began to be reduced. We were right at that point. And so that is how Greenpeace was born. We went on against French atmospheric nuclear testing, saved the whales. 30,000 whales were being slaughtered every year in the oceans, mainly by the Russians and Japanese. And then we went into toxic waste, and 15 years later, I found myself having been in the top committee of Greenpeace all those years, but my organization was changing in ways that I couldn't accept. First, whereas we'd been quite humanitarian early on, saving civilization from nuclear war, they were now saying that humans were the enemies of the earth, the enemies of nature. We are part of nature. We're not the enemies of nature. And the second thing was, the sharp end of the stick was they proposed to ban chlorine worldwide, which is the most important element for public health and medicine. And to make a long story short, I had to leave at that point and become what I have referred to as a sensible environmentalist, basing my positions on logic and science rather than sensationalism, misinformation, and fear campaigns.
So I'm curious. I have my own theories, but I'm much more interested right now in yours. You say they sort of took a turn, or obviously a left turn. Why do you think they did that?
Because we, bunch of environmental people who didn't have the kind of political acumen that the far left has, were unable to avoid being taken over by them once we had power and money. And we had become a strong organization by the mid-'80s with $100 million a year coming in, and they saw that, and they basically came in and took us over. It was a pretty quick process, actually, and a lot of things happened around that time, and for me, it's taken me this long to work my way back out of what the hole I'd sort of got myself into by then, and actually be listened to again. I've been canceled more times than most through these years because of my opinions on subjects like climate, and knowing that the polar bears are healthy and knowing that the coral reefs are healthy and growing. They say everything's dying, but everything does die, Dennis. That's their trick. All individuals die, but then more are born again to replace them. So they get away with that because they show an old polar bear starving to death in National Geographic. And as a matter of fact, starvation is the main cause of death with polar bears because they're a top predator and nothing eats them. So they get old and their teeth fall out, and there's no nursing homes for old polar bears, so they die in the wild, like all animals of that nature do.
Just gave me an idea for a cause. Nursing homes for polar bears.
That's a fun one, isn't it?
So, back to then climate change. They changed the name from global warming to climate change. And the rationale was even excessive cold is a factor, is a consequence of carbon emission. Any take on that?
Well, they've changed it from climate change to extreme weather now. Every weather event is for a while they told us when we said, well, it was awfully cold last winter, they said, oh, that's just weather. That's not climate change. Climate change is the long term, and weather is just short-term stuff. But now that's all they talk about. So they've changed 3 times. And then when for 20 years it didn't get warm, even though we were increasing our CO2 emissions, they invented ocean acidification, which is a complete and utter fabrication. The oceans can never become acidic. It's absolutely impossible for that to happen. And so we have to recognize where they're exaggerating versus where they're completely fabricating. And in terms of the climate, they are completely fabricating because temperature and CO2 are both lower now than they have been through nearly the entire history of life on Earth, which is over 3 billion years. And so if you want to find out about that, you need to read my book, because I can't explain it all in 20 minutes. But my book is only 200 pages long. It's written for a general audience. It's fine for grade 9 and up. Anybody who has proficiency in English can understand it as well as you understand me talking now. But it gives you a tremendous amount of insight into the fakery that has been foisted upon us by these people using invisible and remote stories.
As one of your bigger fans, may I suggest that when you get the chance, to either have you or someone else make an audio of your book, by the way.
It's coming out, Dennis. The audiobook is just about to come out.
You tell me when it does. I will announce it. But in the meantime, folks, it's on Kindle and paperback. Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. You, sir, are a credit to Canada, and for that matter, the human race.
Thank you, Dennis. It's on Amazon.com. It's been #1 in environmental science, even though it's just out. And I hope people will take advantage of this resource for themselves and their family and their friends.
Thank you, sir. You're doing a service.